Hey, Matt. Yeah, I'm with Dan Mudd now. I know that is not the moment that, Dan, you're fired, that you want to talk about. But in this speech, you recounted both the events of last year, but you also talked about lessons for the housing market, the GSEs. And one of the things you pointed out was that a year later, the government still controls most of the housing market, and the rules of the road haven't really been rewritten.
That's exactly right. We've gone a long way in our debate about health care, whether we want to have a different health care system and how much we want the government involved in the health care system of the United States. But we really have backed into a new structure for the housing market whereby the government owns 100% of it. We've had this consensus that goes back really to the Second World War about housing and the government promoting housing, encouraging people to be in housing. It hasn't worked out well for everybody, and now there's an opportunity to step back and have a similar debate to the healthcare debate about what we want the future of the housing market to look like. I think it's a good time to do that.
Well, we're seeing this big regulatory overhaul or push forward in Washington, and it feels a bit piecemeal. That's something you talked about as well. You said fewer regulators, more power. Should the lead regulator there be the Federal Reserve? Should it be this council? Where does that come out?
Well, I think folks should do what they're good at. The Fed does have a view of the whole system and therefore is in a good position to be the systemic regulator. If they see an institution or a practice that's out of line, they ought to have some override authorities there. Examiners, the OTS, the OCC, the FHFA, all those other organizations are examiners, but they're seeing just part of the problem. If you could put them all in one organization with specialties, but all of them examine institutions, I think you'd have a safer system. And then they've had this debate about the consumer and whether there ought to be a consumer regulator.
Which you support.
I support it because I think we need to reinstill confidence in the housing market, in the financial markets, in financial products. And having somebody watching out for the little guy and the medium-sized guy, I think it would add a little bit of bureaucracy, but the cost might be worth it.
Well, let me ask you something. One of the bits of conventional wisdom in Washington, it was that it was the Democrats in Congress who were responsible for letting the portfolios of Fannie and Freddie get so large. We had Senator Bob Corker, Republican from Tennessee, come into Bloomberg for a discussion the other day. He said he thought a lot of this happened under the Bush administration as well. What brought Fannie and Freddie to this perilous place when you were there?
Well, we had a system. We had a system whereby Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were part of the implementation of this long-standing federal policy that said, we think that you have the right to own a home, and we, the government, are going to help you obtain a mortgage in that process.
Did we go too far as a country?
We probably went a little too far as a country, right? Because for a long time it worked wonderfully. Home prices were going up, home ownership was going up, communities were safer, kids were educated, and all of that. The past 2 years have taught us some lessons, and I'm very worried that we haven't stepped back to say, what are the lessons and how should we rethink those original purposes? How much home ownership is too much, and how should we get started again? The government was originally in this business by helping people get into a home for the first time, the VA, the FHA, that sort of thing. And we were always, you know, our parents told us, put 20% down and go buy that house. Return to some of those fundamentals. First-time home buyers, 20% down payment, I think would do a lot of good for the market and a lot of good for restoring confidence.
Well, let me ask you a question about your new life. We don't have a lot of time yet. You all have made some noises about investing in the financial sector. Certainly there are a lot of opportunities to be picked up there. Maybe the FDIC is going to let some private equity firms move into the banking sector very quickly. Is that a space we're going to see Fortress move?
It's of interest to us. There's an enormous need for capital. We're in the other room and we're talking about energy policy. We're talking about financial services policy here. All of these sectors need a huge amount of investment, which is what Fortress does. We're a $30 billion fund. We have a hedge fund. We have a private equity fund. We have a special opportunities fund. We'd like to bring that capital to bear. Financial services, yes, if we can earn the returns.